appreciate the worship team tonight, and also acknowledge Jessica's work back there on the video too. I think those are awesome. So, all right. Well, hey, we are continuing this series, Homegrown. I'm actually not even quite sure what week we're in, but we're continuing this series, and as really this whole series has been about how can we grow the relationships that hit closest to home for us. And so the first couple of weeks we talked about family, talked about parenting, and some of the relationships around that. And last week we kind of started talking a little bit about how we grow relationships in our lives, specifically through the lens of marriage. And tonight I want to kind of speak again to that. But keep in mind here, when we talk about speaking and growing our relationships through the lens of marriage, this is not just simply a talk for those who are married. In fact, I think you're going to find, especially what we're talking about tonight, to be highly applicable to every person, everyone here in this place. If you got a relationship of any significance in your life that you want to grow. So the last week when we kind of talked about, kind of the struggle, sometimes the challenge we can find when it comes to finding love and when it comes to especially staying in love. But today we're going to talk about maybe one of the hardest things to do in a relationship, which is expressing love, communicating to those who matter most to us. And I think some of these communication struggles, they can start off pretty early in life for us, right? In fact, when I was preparing this message, I came across a few kind of kid love letters. And I'm going to do my best. Boy, this is really going to test my eyesight here. But here, the first one we have is, Dear Alexis. This is from Ryan. He says, how are you today? I was writing to inform you that I kind of like you. Don't laugh. This is serious, Thought that was pretty good. Here's one. This is kind of a love letter by, I think, really kind of a future stalker, but it says, I'm sorry that I've been chasing you outside. If you will start to like me, I will not chase you. Makes sense to me. And of course, it's really hard. It's hard expressing love, but especially when your heart gets broken, it can be really tough as well. In fact, I like this one. I'm angry at you, and I'm not talking to you today and tomorrow. P.S. all day, P.S.S. I still love you. It's kind of sweet. And of course, I kind of like this letter, because this is, how do you express love and thanks to God? That's a challenge. And I like this one. It says, Dear God, I do not think anybody could be a better God. Well, I just want you to know, but I'm not just saying that because you're God. Charles. Yeah, so, communication, I don't care, where you're at relationally or season in life, it can be a challenge for all of us. We all sometimes struggle to communicate with those who matter most to us in life. And yet, it's so important, it's so vital, as we're going to discover, to kind of learn kind of the art of good communication. And in fact, in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21, it speaks to kind of the significance, the power of our words, the power of our communication for good or bad in our relationships and in our lives. And it says this, it says, the tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Those who love it will eat its fruit. In other words, what the Proverbs trying to get at here is that you and I, we will ultimately eat our words. You and I, we will ultimately eat our words. And in fact, when you look at your life, so much of your life, especially in the context of relationships, is the result of the words we speak. Like the words that you speak, it produces fruit from your life. It's either producing fruit that's sweet or fruit that is sour and bitter. We're producing, our words are powerful. They're producing fruit. You and I will ultimately eat our words. In fact, I put in my notes this way, is that your relationship will taste like whatever you talk about most. Think about it. Your relationship will taste like whatever you talk about the most. In fact, Mythbusters, they did an episode tackling this myth of, do plants really grow better if someone's talking to it? Someone's talking to a plant, encouraging a plant, does it actually grow better? And so they had these two plants, and they had one where they were talking to it, cheering it on, and then they had another where it was just in the soundproof room, and so they tested it out, and sure enough, can you guess whether this myth was true, whether the plant that was talked to, did it grow more than the one that wasn't talked to? Yeah. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And so anyway, they're thinking about this, and they were pretty taken back by this study themselves. So they decided to also test out the fact, well, does it matter the type of words that are being spoken to this plant? So they took these two plants, and they set one, and they spoke encouraging words over it, positive words over it, good words, sweet words over it. And then they took the other, and they kind of spoke negative words, sour words to it. And of course, I don't really know what that looks like when you're talking to a plant. Like, what's an encouraging word to a plant? It's like, I see a Christmas tree in you. You can do it. I see a future, and negative words like, you're just going to be lumber someday. I mean, you'll never amount to a spruce. I don't know what that looks like. But any guesses on which of these plants grew faster or better than the other? Actually, trick question. Neither of them. Because they both grew. They both grew at the same rate, because here's what you got to get, is that whatever you talk to the most, whatever you speak to the most is what will grow the most. Whatever you speak to most is what grows. So if you're speaking negatively when it comes to your relationship, you're always tearing them down, always speaking about all the mistakes and all the failures and all the parts they miss the mark on, ultimately you're going to grow and you're going to reap some sour fruit in that relationship. And yet the vice versa holds true as well. If you're speaking words of encouragement, words of faith, words of belief, you're going to find a much sweeter relationship as well. See, our words, they have incredible power. Communication is key to really growing a sweet, thriving, healthy marriage and relationship in our life. And so to kind of unpack this and kind of look at how this works, we're going to look at a story that, again, whether you've been in church or not, you're going to be more than a little familiar with. And it's the very kind of first couple story we see in the Bible. And we catch up to this in Genesis chapter 3. Genesis chapter 3. And of course, this chapter is known as the fall of man. But as we're going to come to discover in just a moment, it's actually so much more than that. It's actually a failure of marriage. So you see that the fall of man actually happens because their marriage fails, and specifically it fails because of this communication breakdown that we're going to see. And we're going to kind of kick off here in verse 1 of chapter 3. It says, the serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild animals the Lord God had made. One day he asked the woman, did God really say you must not eat the fruit from any of the trees in the garden? It skips down to verse 2 through 3. It says, of course, we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden. The woman replied, it's the only fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden that we are not allowed to eat. And God said, you must not eat it or even touch it. If you do, you will surely die. So what's he referring to here in Genesis 2? God sets these boundaries. He says, hey, look, you can eat from every one of these trees, 99.9% of the trees in this garden you can eat from, but this 0.1%, this one tree, the tree of good and evil, the tree of knowledge, I don't want you to eat. I don't want you to partake from. If you do, you will surely die. And of course, in classic human condition, what happens is that we end up chasing after and going after the one thing we can't have, right? Like we forget all the great things, all the amazing fruit, the pineapples, the apples, all the amazing things they could have partaken of. We get focused on the one thing we don't have. And listen, the same thing happens in relationships too. In fact, relationship psychologists and counselors, they've dubbed it the 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule. And the 80-20 rule basically works like this, is that in a relationship, nobody's going to give you 100% of what you want. They're just not. Nobody. So a good relationship, let's say, we'll give you 80. So the 80-20 rule goes like this. People have a tendency to leave the 80 they love to try to get the 20 that they want. the 20 that they want. In fact, by the way, this is why people leave churches a lot of times. Like they'll love like 80% of it. Like, I love kind of a small church. I can get to know people. They have amazing apple pie. Yeah, I mean, there's all these things they love about it, right? But there was this one time the pastor burnt my hot dog. One time, right? Again, there's all this 80, and yet we'll leave because of the 20. And we do the same in relationships too. There's this 80. I mean, you can have this, and sometimes maybe even a 90, and yet we'll leave for the 10, we'll leave for the 20. And listen, I share this with you because, and really to challenge you is that if you're going to leave the 80 for the 20, you better make sure that 20 is worth it. You better make sure that 20 is worth it, because here's the thing. My guess is that more often than not, you're going to find that 20 is really just a 20. Sometimes it's not even just that. And in fact, that's kind of what we see what's going on in this story too. When I was reading the story, and I don't know if you've ever thought this, how weird it is. Let's be honest, it's weird. There's a lady talking to a snake. That's weird, right? A serpent, some translations just call it a snake, just call it what it is, She's having a conversation with the snake. And I always kind of wondered, what would make her believe the words of the snake? What would make her, sit there and really kind of, listen to the guidance and the direction of a snake? And listen, when you look at it, it's the same reasons, again, that so many of us leave the 80 for the 20. Because it's tough to just see that person for the 20, that snake for the 20 that it is, when they're focused and telling you how amazing your 80 is. Especially if the person in your life, the 80 in your life, isn't really talking about that. Isn't really talking about the good things about you, isn't really investing in that relationship. In fact, by the way, this is kind of the start of just about every affair kind of starts this way. Is when a person comes in, a kind of a snake comes in, and they start, talking about the 80 that in your life that the 80, of your spouse doesn't seem to notice anymore. And we get caught up, and that's kind of what's happening here. Eve, what we see is her talking to a snake. She sees a stallion. She sees this creature kind of coming in, and what's he offering her? He's offering her understanding. Hey, I get it. Adam be tough to be married to. He's always busy naming all the animals and stuff. He's never around. He's doing his own thing. That'd be tough. That'd be tough. He's so wrong in so many ways, and you're right. He's wrong for you, Eve, and you're right. You're right to be upset. You're right to be frustrated. You're right to want more. And see, we begin to see this sort of downward spiral, this communication breakdown that would ultimately lead not just to the fall of man, but the failure of this marriage. And in doing so, we actually see sort of the first temptation of really a communication breakdown. And we're really just going to cover two. I think on your notes it says three, but we're just going to touch on two. So you can relax, those you time watchers. But here's how it goes. And so let's kind of catch up to this. Verse 3 through 5, we begin to see this first kind of temptation of a communication breakdown. It says, it's only the fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden that we are not allowed to eat. So here Eve is responding to the snake, to the serpent here. And God said, listen, God told us, says, you must not eat or even touch it. If you do, you will die. And the servant, he replies, he says, no, you won't die. God knows that your eyes will be opened as soon as you eat it, and you will be like God, knowing both good and evil. Some translations actually say this, put it this way, it says, did God really say? Are you sure, Eve, that he really said that? That God really said that you can eat of every tree, but you can't have this one? That seems so strange. Holding out on you like that. But here's the thing. I used to always kind of think when I'd read this passage that the serpent was trying to undermine Eve's confidence in God. And certainly there was some of that going on. But there was so much more than just that going on. See, listen, the serpent's not simply saying, yeah, God said that, but you can't trust that. That's not the angle. That's not the approach he's taking here. No, the reason the serpent is asking Eve that you sure that's what God said, is because the command that this tree is poison, that if you eat of that tree of good and evil, that you'll die, that you'll surely die. And get this, you need to understand, this happens in Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 through 17. Now keep with me here. The problem is he's asking Eve because Eve wasn't there. When they heard this, because listen, Eve isn't created until Genesis chapter 2, verse 22. See, are you tracking with me here? She didn't hear that firsthand. She heard that from Adam. She was going off of the knowledge of what Adam had passed on to her about what God said. So the only way Eve would know is if Adam had told her that. And here's why I share that, is because notice how the enemy kind of works and begins to, again, bring in this communication breakdown. The enemy does not simply question God's truthfulness, he questions Adam's trustworthiness. He's questioning Adam's trustworthiness. See, this is the first temptation of communication. It's just distrust. It's just distrust. It's where the enemy begins to whisper there in this conversation, begins to question Eve. And he's not saying so much, don't trust God. He's saying, don't trust Adam. He's saying God, he's not so much saying that God is wrong. He's saying God never said that. Really what he's getting at with Eve is, again, it's like, come on, Eve. Like, are you really going to believe that Adam heard from God and he heard correctly? Listen, Adam hardly ever listens to you. Like when you talk with him, come on, Eve. Think about the last time you sent him to the grocery store. You sent him with that list of tortillas, tomatoes, and lettuce, and he comes back with what? Like cookies and root beer and a big bag of chips. He's a guy. He doesn't. Are you going to really trust that he listened to you, and not just listen to you, that he listened to God, and that he's relaying this accurately to you? For all you know, Eve, he could have been hanging out on the couch watching TV. And he wasn't listening to God if he was really watching the game. And so the enemy begins to create this level of distrust and begins to undermine her trust in her spouse, her trust in the relationship. And here's why this starts to matter for us. I shared a couple weeks ago that there's really only two things that our kids regularly need communicated to them. They need to hear, really, every single day as they're growing up. For girls, it's that they're beautiful, that they're valuable. For boys, it's that they have what it takes. And I think sometimes we can tend to have this sense that somehow we grow up beyond those needs. Like somehow we get to a point, like after we hit, college, or we hit our 30s, our 40s, whatever, we hit a point at some place where we don't need to hear that anymore. We don't need that question answer. We don't need a value or significance communicated in our lives. But here's the truth. Listen, you never graduate from those two questions needing to be communicated and answered in your life. It's just that where that's coming from changes places. When you're growing up, it's got to come from your parents. It's got to come from those who are watching over you, those who are investing in you, those who the adults that are basically parenting you. But when you grow up, if you go on to get married, it shifts from your parent to you got to hear that from your spouse. These are questions that have to be answered and regularly communicated the answer from your spouse. And here's the secret, ladies, that probably a lot of guys might not always tell you or want to tell you. And again, this is a generalization. I'm not saying that this is the case for every guy, but I do think for most guys. And that's this, is that men are afraid of being inadequate. Men are afraid of being inadequate. And listen, distrust tells them that they are. Distrust, when you communicate distrust, when you don't speak words of trust, when you don't give trust, listen, you're communicating that they're not enough. Somehow they're not strong enough. Somehow they're not smart enough. Somehow they're not capable enough. And ladies, here's what you got to get about your communication. Your communication's always communicating one of these two things. It's either communicating trust or distrust. It's either communicating faith or doubt. Belief or hey, I don't think you can do it. I don't think you have the ability to do that. And of course, as we look in this story, Eve, she chooses instead of trust, what we've come to discover is that she chooses the avenue of distrust. She chooses to communicate distrust in Adam. And here's how we kind of know this. In verse 6, it says the woman was convinced. Here the serpent's telling her, hey, it's not that big of a deal. It's going to be fine. This is more than a 20. It's 100. You want to take this fruit. It's worth it. And so she saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her. So she took some of the fruit and ate it. Then she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it too. He ate it too. Now here's another kind of interesting question when you look at this. Like, in a weird, like I can kind of get why Eve would eat the fruit. Here she's got this snake who comes across like a stallion, promising her the world. Man, if you just take a bite of this apple, it's going to change your life. I kind of get it. With Eve. And again, how you sure your husband really even heard right? But why would Adam eat the fruit? Like Adam, he knows the risk. Like he heard from God. Like he knows if I eat this, this could be bad news. This could be like a scene from Snow White. This is not a good deal. And yet he still decides to take a bite. And I was thinking about this, and I think this is again so true. And I think kind of the reason kind of gets to the heart of why he would be willing to eat this fruit. And that's that, listen, and of course, by the way, too, speaks to kind of the value and the importance of speaking trust, because when we speak distrust, listen, it speaks something about your belief in that person. And listen, if your spouse doesn't believe in you, get this, at some point you won't either. If your spouse doesn't believe in you, at some point you won't either. And so Adam is like, man, you think I'm crazy. You think I'm incapable of leading this family. You think I'm incapable of hearing from God. Well, you know what? Maybe I am. Maybe I am. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe I didn't hear God the way I thought I heard him. Maybe I am incapable, but maybe I am inadequate. And so Adam eats this fruit, even knowing that it would kill him, even knowing the cost. Because again, if your spouse doesn't believe in you, if your spouse doesn't speak trust into your life but chooses the avenue of distrust, at some point, if your spouse doesn't believe in you, you won't either. You won't either. See, I think way too often we grossly underestimate the power of our words, especially over our spouse. It's funny. It's like, we seem to understand the power of words when it comes to kids. Like, we're watchful of what we say around our kids. It's like when it comes to little Johnny, it's like, little Johnny, you can do anything. And then big Johnny's like, you can do nothing right. It knows the contrast, right? And look, I get the pushback too. Okay, trust. Like, you want me to put trust in my husband? You want me to put trust in this guy? Come on. Like, and you don't know how he's hurt me. You don't know the things he said. You don't know what he's done. And it'd be kind of the tendency for the guys to be like, yeah, you need to put some trust in me. But I'll say this, guys, kind of speaking directly to the guys here, is listen, guys, before you start amening and like, my wife, she needs to start showing and giving more trust, more trust in me, speaking more trust over me. Look, let's be honest. Sometimes there's a good reason of why your spouse isn't entrusting you more than you would like her to entrust you. Sometimes there's a real reason of why she's not speaking words of trust, and there's a couple reasons for that. One is just broken trust. And listen, guys, if you want to start hearing the words of trust spoken more to you, listen, you and I, we've got to be willing to learn to speak words of apology. If you want to start hearing the words of trust spoken more in your life, we got to be willing to speak the words of apology more, because here's the thing, and I put in my notes, God can't fix what you pretend isn't broken. God can't fix what you pretend isn't broken. So often it's like, especially guys, I think this can be a real struggle. We struggle to say, I'm sorry. We struggle with those words of apology. We struggle with I recognize and I acknowledge that I broke trust here. It's a challenge. It's a challenge, especially for guys. In fact, I was thinking about this here. Here's a kind of an apology note by kid Liam. that I think kind of expresses the struggle to apologize. It says, Dear Brody, Miss P made me write you this note. All I want to say sorry for is not being sorry because I tried to feel sorry, but I don't. Again, talk about, that's a challenge, right? Learning how to apologize. In fact, there was a guy by the name of Ross Jones who wrote, talks about 4 different levels of apology, and just kind of run through these real quick. But a level one apology is where we say, I'm sorry, but, which is really not an apology at all. Whatever follows that but, it just disqualifies the whole validity of that apology, right? You're just justifying at that point. So sometimes it comes out as like, I'm sorry, but I was just in a bad mood that day. Or I'm sorry, but when you did that to me, it just made me so angry, right? Those are not real apologies, right? There's another apology that's kind of along the same line. It's the second level of an apology, and that's I'm sorry if. I'm sorry if, which usually is at least an acknowledgement of the other person, but still a lack of real ownership of what I've done. I'm sorry if your feelings got hurt. I'm sorry if you're really frustrated. And of course, you probably noticed that both of those levels of apology aren't real apologies. They're kind of pretend apologies. Now, a real apology doesn't start to happen until we get to kind of a level 3 apology, which is when we start to say, I'm sorry for. I'm sorry for. It's when I'm willing to finally say aloud and put words to what I've done wrong and to the tension and the broken trust that they're feeling. It's when I say, I'm sorry for what I said. I'm sorry for what I did to you. But listen, if you want to take it to a whole another level, there's the level 4 apology. And this says, I'm sorry and it's really a combo between levels 3 and 4 where it's, I'm sorry for the thing that I did, and here's the steps that I'm going to take to not do that again. I'm sorry for that thing I did when I did it, and I love you and I care for you. And here's what I'm going to do to show you that I'm still very much committed to you. I love you. I want to show you that listen, my heart is with you. I want to do this right. See, that's a true apology. And it's so important. Listen, you want to hear the words of trust, you got to learn to speak the words of apology. You got to learn to speak the words of apology. But I think for some of us, it's not so much a broken trust. While certainly that can be a reason why trust isn't so much given, but oftentimes also neglected trust. Neglected trust, which leads to the second and final kind of temptation of communication, which is disengagement. Disengagement. And again, especially I think, guys, we can struggle a lot with this. See, if for men, if our biggest fear is feeling inadequate and distrust speaks that to us, listen, you got to understand, for ladies, for women, they are afraid of being unloved, and disengagement tells them that. Disengagement tells them that, listen, I don't care, I don't notice, I don't value you. See, and as a result, whereas distrust says, I don't believe you can handle it, disengagement says to a lady, listen, I've got to handle this because they don't care about this. They don't care about what's going on. Somebody's got to take the lead. Somebody's got to do something about this. And you can really see this picture, this kind of get the sense of disengagement in this story. And we see this in Genesis 3:6. Again, the woman was convinced. She saw the tree was beautiful. She eats the fruit. And then notice towards the end of this, it says, then she gave some to her husband who was with her. He was with her. So often it's like, well, it's Eve's fault, that we struggle with all that we struggle with. But notice Adam was there. Adam was there. Do you ever think about how crazy that is? Here Adam is watching his love of his life, having this conversation with someone he knows is a snake. He named all the animals. He knew that this was not a creature to trust, right? And yet here's Adam just like, there's my wife talking to a snake. We'll go. No big deal. Just totally disengaged, right? And listen, again, I think so often, we wonder, as guys, it's like, man, I want to take the lead, I want to take the charge, but listen, so often why we don't is because of this sense of disengagement. In fact, I put in my notes is that the greatest sin of a man is really passivity. It's passivity. In fact, the greatest sin of a man is you're just so disengaged that you don't even notice what's going on in your own house. You don't even notice what's going on with your own children. You don't even notice that your wife's hurting, that she's broken. And yet, by the way, too, isn't it amazing how we can be so engaged in everything else in our lives, but what's going on with those closest to home? Like we can be so engaged at work, we can be so engaged at the golf course, and we get home and it's like, man, we just want to sit on the couch. Don't talk to me. I'm done talking. And by the way, this is my biggest struggle. I'll be the first to admit, I struggle with this tendency to just disengage. And yet, I'm telling you, man, this is so important. In fact, for some of you, this could be the very thing that actually saves so many of your marriages, saves so many of your relationships, is re-engaging to the relationship. When you learn to protect your marriage now so you won't have to fight for it later. But by learning to notice, by learning to pay attention, by learning to just be a little bit more aware and a little bit more focused on the love of your life, on this wife, this gift, this blessing of a spouse in your life. And of course, there's a lot of reasons why sometimes we disengage. Sometimes just busyness, sometimes just tiredness, whatever the case is. But I do want to kind of target one main reason, and I think a reason that sometimes we don't always think of when it comes to why so many of us disengage. And not just guys, by the way, too, but sometimes ladies as well when it comes to our relationships. And it's really kind of what we started talking about last week. And it's all found in this concept of expectations. And in fact, I want to share it with you. And last week I kind of shared with you, everyone's got a picture, kind of their dream person, their dream relationship. Well, we've also all got a list of expectations. In fact, by the way, too, if you're single, I'm about to help you out a lot. You're going to come to understand the thinking behind what a woman really wants and what a man really wants. So again, this is a generalized list, but here's what women want. Women want a man that, I should put it that way, one, makes her laugh. Women want a man who, you don't need to be a comedian. You just need to, occasionally make her grin or smile or something. Romantic and thoughtful. It means, we're instead of just always taking her out to McDonald's, maybe dish out a little extra to take her to chalet. Something a little bit more romantic, a little more thoughtful. Think she's pretty 24 hours a day. Listen, guys, if she ever says, how do I look at 2 a.m, listen, the answer is always, you look amazing. You look amazing. There's only one right answer to that. Speaking of that, you got to know she's right all the time. See, I'm telling you, single guys helping you out. Can talk about his feelings. She wants a guy who can not just talk about how work is going, but how you feel work is going. And not just at 10 in the morning, like when you get home at 5 and maybe sometime in between that, how do you really feel work is going right now? How do you feel like your boss is really talking to you and treating you right now? Somebody could talk about their feelings. Watches HGTV. Yeah, hey, nothing more attractive than, have we thought of maybe remodeling this bathroom? Appreciates sales, and then of course reads his Bible. All right, so that's the flip side. This is men want a woman that thinks he's hilarious. Laugh, we want you to laugh at our jokes, even if they're not funny. Believes he can do everything, right? Hey, remember that time when I scored the game-winning touchdown? Hey, why don't you tell me that again? Yeah, why don't you share that? Because he knows that she's loved with hearing it. It encourages him to talk about himself. And then never makes him talk about his feelings. I don't have to go into that. Yeah, see? Watches ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN3, ESPN Deportes. Yes. Appreciates savings. So has an appreciation for savings. And then maybe not necessarily reads the Bible, but at least has a Bible. has a Bible. So, but again, these are expectations. And of course, kind of a silly list, but listen, here's why I share that, is that, have you noticed our expectations for our spouse, friends, and family are often larger than the expectations we have for ourselves? Have you ever noticed that? Our expectations for our spouse, friends, and family are often larger than the expectations we have for ourselves. And again, we see this so kind of perfectly encapsulated in this story. As again, it all goes down, they eat the fruits, and God kind of shows up on the scene. And in verse 11, it says, and he comes up to him, and it says to Adam, he said, who told you were naked? I mean, here they're hiding from God, and I love his response in verse 12. It says, it was the woman. Way to go, Adam. Way to not throw your wife under the bus, right? But he goes, it was the woman who gave me the fruit, and I ate it. And again, by the way, how do you know? So often we say, how do I know if I'm eating from the wrong tree? Listen, this is one of the ways you can know. How do you know if you're eating from the wrong tree, if you're setting yourself up for a bitter relationship or a sweet relationship, is when you end up eating from the wrong tree, ends up with us covering up our mistakes and pointing out our spouse's mistakes. When we start to kind of shift to the blame game, when we put it all on the other person. When we put it all on the other person, that's exactly what Adam's doing. And hey, listen, he's not taking any responsibility for this relationship. He's not taking, putting any of the expectations on himself. It's all about his spouse, what she needs to do, what she could be doing better. It becomes a blame game. And look, I share this with you because again, this is where it kind of starts to change for us. This is where really you can, and not just in a married life, but even in a dating life, again, singles, if you're looking for the perfect and right one, this is where the story starts to change, and you can really kind of set yourself up for God to do some pretty amazing things in your relationship. And we actually see it in Luke chapter 6, verse 31. This is a passage where Jesus kind of talks about relationships, because so often, what's interesting in the Bible, so often we sit there and think, well, hey, I would take some responsibility, I would step up to the plate, I would take some initiative, I would get engaged, I would give some trust. If they didn't do this to me, or they didn't say this to me, they didn't hurt me. But what's interesting about the Bible is never once does God actually talk about how people respond to you, what people do to you. It talks about, listen, what are you going to do for them? It's not the other way around. In fact, we see this, Luke 6, verse 31. It says, here's a simple rule of thumb for behavior. Ask yourself what you want people to do for you, then grab the initiative and do it for them. Isn't that awesome? Ask yourself what you want people to do for you, then grab the initiative and do it for them. Listen, you want to find the perfect one? You want to meet that kind of love of your life? Listen, it starts with you first being that person. Being the person that you want to find. Taking the initiative to do the things. So often, not sitting back like Adam and blaming all the problems, blaming all the issues, putting all the expectations on the other person, but instead raising the expectations on yourself. Taking the initiative. I mean, imagine in your relationship, imagine in your marriage, if both of you, rather than pointing at the other person, rather than blaming the other person, you actually took initiative. You took the initiative to sit there and say, rather than pointing at their fault, I'm going to start to take an effort and make an effort to be the person that I would hope that they would ultimately become. To be the person that I would hope I could ultimately find. I mean, imagine for a second a marriage where there's just two people trying to outserve each other. Oh, hey, you're going to make, no, I'll make dinner tonight, not you. Oh, you're going to do dishes? No, I'm going to step in there. I'll do the dishes. Where you beat the other person to the punch on stuff. See, there's, if you want to, and again, especially singles, you want to find that perfect person, and again, you want to kind of rediscover your spouse and kind of the 80 in their life. Listen, there's two questions you got to ask, and then there's one response to it, and that is that you got to ask the question, what do you want others to do for you when it comes to your relationship, when it comes to your spouse? And then what do you want others to be for you? And then you just beat them to the punch. You take the initiative. You do those things. You take that step. Even if that step is is again requiring you to say something, do something, even before they've ever done anything to earn that apology, to earn that kindness, to earn that act of generosity. In fact, that's what we see as we kind of start to wrap up this story right here. And this is, again, kind of the really beautiful kind of turning point. And we see it in Genesis chapter 3, verse 20. It says, "Then the man Adam named his wife Eve because she would be the mother of all who live." I love that. See, think about this. The last time he was talking about her, he was describing her failure. But notice the shift. I'm going to stop describing her failure, and I'm going to start declaring her future. Verse 20, "Then the man Adam named his wife Eve." Before she ever did anything, before she ever sat there and apologized or did this or tried to do something to kind of earn that kindness. No, he took the first step before she ever did anything. Listen, you want to give birth to something, not just bitter fruit, but actually something sweet, something life-giving in your relationship. You got to learn to prophesy over your spouse's future. Instead of describing their failures, you got to make a decision. Either I'm going to eat the fruit of my description of the fruit or of my declaration, and not describe simply all their failures, all their mistakes, but I'm going to start declaring their goodness, start declaring the 80% in their life, start declaring the future, who God's made them to be, who God's created them to be, start declaring God's word over their life, because whatever you speak will grow. Whatever you speak will grow. And listen, this is so vital for us. I want to kind of wrap up with a story, because listen, for some of you, this is not so much words you need to speak over your spouse, but for you, it's the words you speak over your own heart about your spouse. See, for some of you, it's like, yeah, okay, that's great. The words I speak over my relationship will determine whether it's sweet, whether it's bitter, whether it's life, whether it's death. But what do you do when you're just not feeling it? What do you do when your just heart is just, you thought, man, they've done